Welcome aboard the Athletics Can't Wait Jets podcast, your nonstop shop for all things Jets with Tim McMaster, Zack Rosenblatt, and Marissa Dunn.
Can't wait!
Summer is officially over unless, well, if you're in the NFL, that is. The Jets have reported to training camp, and if you cover the NFL, most of the Jets have reported to training camp. Welcome into the Can't Wait podcast. Thrilled to have you here. Tim McMaster along with Zack Rosenblatt. Our producer, Marissa Dunn, is big timing us with this flashy new podcast that she's a part of. It's okay. As long as she remembers the little guys. Like,
yeah, I know. She's getting all these, interviews with Saquon. Well, she's not getting them, but she's a part of them with Saquon Barkley and Stephen Jones and Andy Reid flying to Kansas City. She's just having the time of her life without us,
Yeah. So check out Scoop City. But
anyway, listen to Scoop City. It's great.
Yeah, that's what Marissa's on. So she's still here in heart, but yeah, she's really busy with Scoop City, which is Diana Rossini's new podcast with Chase Daniels here at The Athletic. Check it out if you haven't. Great stuff, great interviews, great information so far. So check that out. Zack, you have been traveling quite a bit yourself, not for work, but for play. How's your month of June been?
I'll say it was partly one of the trips was for work, but it was to Newport Beach, California. So how much you want to call that work is up to you. But it was funny. The month of June, I traveled to the West Coast on 3 separate trips. I went to a wedding in the Santa Ynez Valley, which is like wine country in Southern California. I went to Lake Tahoe for a bachelor party, and then I went to Newport Beach for the Mr. Irrelevant celebration, which was a lot of fun. That article came out, I can't even remember at this point. Time has been weird. like a week or two ago that came out. Spent the whole week with Jalen Key in Newport with him and his family. All the fun activities they did. Wrote a whole big story about it. It was a lot of fun. Hope you guys read that if you haven't already. And then got back and kind of tried to take it easy for the last few weeks in July, getting ready for training camp. And we kicked into full gear yesterday. Tuesday they reported, so there was report day. Obviously, I had a lot of drama to start out because you can never go more than we went longer than usual without any Jets drama. So Hassan Reddick, he heard that we needed some more content, so he decided to not come to camp. I heard that's why he didn't show up. It was for the content. So that's why. I guess we don't need to talk about it. That's why he's not here.
Let's moving on. No, let's start there. We'll talk about Reddick. We're going to talk about Aaron Rodgers and his explanation of Egypt and how he's looked on the field too. We're actually going to talk about some football, not just the off the field stuff. But yeah, we got to start with Reddick because it just is what it is, right? This team went out and traded for a key piece that's going to be a big part of the pass rush that he wanted a new contract. They knew he wanted a new contract. They pulled the trade anyway, and now he's not at training camp. So we said during mini camp OTAs, okay, we'll see what happens when training camp really opens. Obviously, he's not going to be here if he wants a new contract. But now we're at the point where he's potentially being fined $50,000 per day. This is going to be a daily thing that Saleh and company are going to have to deal with because you guys are just going to keep asking about it.
Yeah, Saleh's made it pretty clear he doesn't really have much to say about it, but yeah, we do have to keep checking. They put him on the reserve not reported. I forget what the exact term. Reserve not reported list today, which you don't really do that unless you think they're not going to be here in the near future. I think the 49ers did it with Trent Williams as well. Last year, the Chiefs did it with Chris Jones. If you remember, he sat out into the season. So I don't think it's not a thing you feel the need. It opens up a roster spot is the reason why you do it. So the Jets signed a quarterback, Ben Bryant, who I definitely have heard of before today.
Look at this. Before the show, I was like, hey, should we mention Ben Bryant? And you were like, I don't know. And I was like, I'll put it at the bottom of the rundown. And here we are, right at the
already
top,
talking about him. But anyway, the point being so you don't clear a roster spot to sign somebody like that unless you think he's not probably coming back in the immediate future. I don't think they really know. I don't know how much communication there's been between the sides, frankly. A lot of the stuff that I'll probably talk about right now is stuff that's been reported, but it's worth covering. When they traded for him, they obviously did it with the knowledge that he wanted more money. I think they had conversations about giving more money, but it wasn't how much he wanted. So he didn't agree to it, but he did. At least the Jets were under the impression that despite not signing a new deal, that he would report for the offseason program and that, down the line they could discuss a new contract and extension. The Jets wanted him to prove that he deserved it. He feels that he deserves it already. So now you have a little game of chicken right here where the Jets aren't going to pay him unless he shows up. They've made that very clear, and he doesn't want to show up until he gets paid. So, I think the Jets have the leverage here, in my opinion. If, he's losing $50,000 every day. So he's the one they need him. I think he's a very good player. I don't think him missing these practices will necessarily impact his ability to go and get 10 sacks or whatever. But, and an additional thing, and I have this in my observations that's going to come out sometime this afternoon, just from asking around the league, talk to some people from other teams. I'm under the impression that, a big reason why the Jets only had to trade a 2026 third round pick is because these teams did not want to pay Hassan Reddick what he was asking for. The impression I get, he was asking in the mid-20s, which will be around $25 million. $25 million replaced him, I think, tied with Myles Garrett for fifth most for average per year. I get why he's asking for that. You look at his stats, he's been, the second or third best sack artist in the NFL over the last 4 years. He was fourth in Defensive Player of the Year voting 2 years ago. But, there's obviously also a reason why he's bounced around the league a little bit. I think that's something to take note of. I mean, he's been he's been on the Panthers, the Eagles, the Cardinals, and now he's on the Jets. And he clearly wants more money. And it's unfortunate that they have this distraction right now. Saleh has done the positive spin, and to his credit, he said we're focused on the 89 other guys. He's trying not to talk about it. And one of his points is very accurate, is that Will McDonald in particular is somebody who's going to get a lot of valuable reps now. He probably would have anyway, but he's getting more. You have a guy like Takers McKinley, who was really, really good today, veteran trying to make it back in the league, getting some reps. Michael Clemens getting some reps with the first team defense. So, they're trying to spin it in the positive, but ultimately, it's hard not to criticize the Jets for this at the same time, because number one, you let Bryce Huff walk when you could have just re-signed him. Which we've talked about on here. We thought they should have. And then they trade JFM away for basically nothing to the Broncos. And now all of a sudden you're really banking on Hassan Reddick. I think he saw that. He probably wanted more money, maybe even as a result of that, knowing how valuable he was to this team now. But he's as high as you want to be on Will McDonald. He is not Hassan Reddick. Bryce Huff's not Hassan Reddick, frankly. This is a guy that's very, very good. And there's a reason why they traded for him, because they thought he could make an impact, whether it's for 1 year or whatever it is. They were hoping they could, get a sack artist to come and improve their pass rush, which was already pretty good last year. And now he's not at camp. I don't think there's any inclination for when he might show up. His camp has not either said anything publicly or leaked things privately, which you've seen a certain side of this leak to a few reporters about, their perspective of what's been going on. You haven't seen any leaks from the Reddick side. So I don't think anybody really knows what he wants, how long he's willing to stay out. I think his teammates have kind of brushed it off, which is the right move. I think ultimately, I don't think ultimately in the locker room, guys blame anyone for trying to get more money usually, but this is kind of, he hasn't practiced with these guys at all. He didn't show up for a single second of offseason workout. So he's basically going to be walking into the room and not knowing anybody in the building. So it's unique. I wonder how the longer it lingers, how much of an issue it becomes. It's something we're obviously going to have an eye on. Again, I genuinely have no idea when he might come back. I don't get the impression it's going to be anytime soon, because if he's sticking to his guns and he wants more money, yeah, he's going to stick it out. But also $50,000 a day adds up pretty quick. I know he's making $14.03 million this year in salary, I believe is the number.
14.25.
But he's already at 3 days skip. That's $150,000. So that's going to add up. And then once you get to the regular season, you're forfeiting game checks. So it's an unfortunate distraction for, again, like Saleh kept emphasizing, he wanted a quiet offseason. This kind of stuff does not give you that. They've done a good job again of not making it a huge deal, but it's going to be asked about. His teammates are going to be asked about it. Saleh will be. And until it gets resolved, I always thought that the most obvious way to resolve this, when this became a thing in minicamp, and we talked about it, was, you give him more guarantee. It's what Amari Cooper and the Browns just did. You would guarantee his contract, which doesn't really matter because not like they're going to cut Hassan Reddick anyway. And then you throw on some incentives so he could make, X amount more money. I forget how much it was for Amari, whether it's $5 million in incentives in addition to the 14 million. You get him, that gets him closer to 20. That gets him around what Bryce Huff is getting per year. He'd move up in the rankings in terms of like average per year, which I think is clearly important to him. But I don't know if he's willing to compromise for that. So that's kind of where we are. The Jets are not going to do anything until he walks into the building. So it's they're taking a hardline stance, and you hope it doesn't get ugly before it gets better.
Starting to feel ugly already. And it's tough with a guy that, like you said, there's no relationship there. And I wonder if Saleh, to a little degree, has some regret. He had the quote back at the beginning of minicamp. He's the last guy I'm worried about will be ready to play football. And maybe that's still true. Maybe he's in unbelievable shape wherever he is at home, and he's going to show up and day one be ready to go. Like, who knows? But oof. On the other hand, Reddick had the right quotes when he got signed, right? No matter what happens with the contract, I'll be happy. And that's clearly not true either. So
weird. But we addressed this. I'm not going to, keep hammering it. But, you and I were kind of annoyed with his tweet where that tweet he had a while back where he's like, there's a lot of lies out there or whatever. He has every opportunity he wants to address whatever lies are out there. So I think ultimately he comes out of this looking worse than the Jets do, even though it's easy to make fun of the Jets. But ultimately,
the Jets look bad because of like the collective, right? Yeah. Like it's not because of this instance.
The criticism is warranted. They traded for a guy who wanted a new contract, made it clear to the Eagles he wanted to be traded unless they gave him that, and they traded for him. Whether he told them he was going to report or not, and that's all according to the Jets side. Whether he did that or not, you traded for him knowing he was disgruntled, and he's still disgruntled. So like there was a risk that this was going to happen, and then it happened, and so. The criticism for the Jets is fair, even if I do think Reddick, at least in terms of like here, like in New York, among the fans here, the media here, I think he looks worse in this. Whereas I think nationally, I think people are focused on the Jets role in it.
They just like to kick a dog when it's down, so to speak. You mentioned Will McDonald, and obviously this does open up that just extra playing time at this point of season for him against the ones and all of that. But Jermaine Johnson was speaking today a little bit, and he gave some respect. He said he's a problem and he will be a problem in this league. It's interesting. Everybody seems to have this big opinion of Will McDonald, and it's tough for us because we didn't get to see it last year much, right, in action. And that's going to be one of the real fun, fascinating things about the preseason games, I think, is I'm assuming Will McDonald's going to get a lot of time.
Yeah, absolutely. And, even if Reddick was here, he was going to play a much bigger role this year just because they rotate their defensive ends. And you heard Jermaine Johnson alluding to being willing to go inside and play 3 technique if he has to. And if you're doing that, then that's kind of like the JFM pass rushing lineup. I mean, he's probably a little small to go inside, but he is very strong. So, if you put Jermaine inside, then you throw Haason Reddick and Will McDonald on the outside, and you have that, everybody attack the quarterback group that is really hard to stop on passing downs. And so if Will McDonald's ready to make an impact like that, then they're in really, really good shape. He's a first-round pick, so if Reddick doesn't play for X amount of weeks, if he doesn't come back in time for the regular season, whatever it is Will McDonald ready to take on a full-time role? I don't know about that. I think anytime we haven't talked to Will yet, anytime you ask Robert about like, has Will bulked up, he doesn't really give a direct answer, which is an indication to me that he probably hasn't really like completely bulked up. Whether he's gotten stronger is an important question. And to Saleh's point, and it's completely valid. He always says this every year, like until they put the pads on, I'm not really going to judge the D-line because, it's hard to really judge how physical they are. Like Will McDonald can be dominant when nobody's touching each other because he's really fast and he has great bend and long arms and all that stuff. But once it gets to the nitty gritty and he has to get by Tyron Smith or Morgan Moses or, Olu Fashanu, then you'll kind of really see where he's improved in his development. I think Jermaine Johnson, you kind of could tell right away that he bulked up last year and he was dominant from day one last year. Like he was the best player on the field sometimes. I don't know if Will McDonald is going to reach that level, but if he can at minimum be a productive pass rusher for this team, they're in good shape. They might need a little more than that from him. And for a first round pick in his second year, I think that's fair, especially because he was a little older for a first round pick too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I still have high hopes for him. I do think he has a very high ceiling. He's a lot of potential. He needs to get stronger and he needs to be more of a factor in the run game. But, he's going to get an opportunity to do that in camp for sure because they're going to run the ball a lot anyway. And, going against this is a better offensive line than it was last year. Like he's going against more talented players. I think him going against someone like Tyron Smith, I feel like Tyron Smith is like the ultimate guy to practice against, because if you go against him, then going against almost any other offensive lineman is maybe going to make it seem easier. I don't know, because I just think he's like, I keep hyping him up because it's really fun. It is fun to watch offensive linemen, but it's especially fun to watch them when it's somebody like this who just like his technique. You can just see it in his feet, how quickly his feet move, the way he moves, how big he is, how strong he is. You just see it on the field, and it's like fun to watch. And he's been dominant, and so I think that's going to help a guy like Will McDonald, especially because if you're not strong enough for Tyron Smith, he's going to shove you into the ground. So that's going to be fun to watch. And pads will go on Monday, I believe, will be the first day of pads. That's when you really start taking note of like D linemen and defensive players in general, but guys in the trenches, that's where you kind of see guys really stand out. And Jermaine Johnson did last year. Like he was amazing.
It's refreshing just to hear you talk about the offensive line winning battles too, right? Like after last year where all we heard about was how bad the offensive line looked through the whole summer. And then sure enough, what happened at the beginning of the season. All right, let's shift gears from Reddick to Rodgers. We will get to how he's looked in camp. Obviously, he's 100%, which is exciting coming off the Achilles. But we do need to revisit the Egypt trip. He went on Pardon My Take this week, and his take is nowadays minicamp is no different than the OTAs. So if you combine them, there's 12 practices. I went to 10 of them. It's no big deal. Which, sure, like, why was the communication?
Ultimately, he's right. Like it's
right.
They are OTA practice. Like we don't need to like keep drawing this out, but it was talked about yesterday, so that's why we're addressing it. But like the main Brian Costello asked him, and I was going to. He asked like why schedule it that week was the main question. And his response was basically like, I looked at the schedule from last year. If you remember, the Jets started earlier last year because of the Hall of Fame game, which he probably,
didn't make
playing this trip in the midst of him tearing his Achilles in his defense. Yeah. And so he booked it for that week or whatever it was. Again, he probably could have done it later in the offseason, or why does it have to be right now? Like you could also wait until after you retire or whatever. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, he wanted to go on this trip. And then he said, once he tried to move some things around, but then he just didn't. I don't know.
That was the best part of the quote. Yeah. It just didn't. I didn't.
Look, I'm like this topic I've been asked about this on every radio show I've been on. Like I'm so overdone at this point. The reality is like, and I'll say this over and over again, like while it's okay to like point out that it's pretty ridiculous that the starting quarterback wasn't at the mandatory practices while everybody else was. Like if they aren't good this year, it's not going to be because of those. Like Aaron Rodgers was amazing in practice today. Like he looked like his old self. I think only one of his balls like hit the ground. And so ultimately I'm not going to hammer him about it really anymore unless it becomes like a thing. His teammates don't seem to care. I mean, they're not going to publicly say that they cared either way. But he's back. He's doing the same stuff he did last year, pulling guys aside. We saw him pull aside Malachi Corley yesterday to explain the right way to run a route. He pulled Garrett Wilson aside because he was saying how, Garrett's so good at like doing certain things and some of the moves he makes in the line of scrimmage that he does moves that he doesn't need to sometimes, or if he just like, does the route or whatever, he'd get open. Whereas he's, doing all this fancy stuff and complicating it when he doesn't need to. It was a very interesting note. But anyway, like he's pulling guys aside. He's setting the tone. He's setting the tenor of like what this team's going to be. So as long as his teammates are happy with him and his coaches are fine with it, and the Jets, are healthy and competing, like I think that it's not everybody's going to forget about it once the season starts at the very least, even if it's going to, it's a topic for the national radio shows and all the takesmen out there, because who milked it for like weeks because there was nothing going on in the NFL, by the way.
Of course.
But Rodgers addressed it to a degree. He talked about what he did in Egypt. He rode a camel.
Didn't get spit on.
I rode a camel in Israel once, actually. It was pretty fun. It's an interesting because they like get all the way on the ground and then you sit on them and they stand up. Yeah. Anyway, good for him going on his lifelong bucket list trip, I guess.
So yeah, that was the part we didn't talk about, was that he came up with this bucket list idea 30 years ago, he said.
Oh, I think my favorite part
he
was
in
that
an advanced
he was
elementary
in
school
a
class,
gifted and
right?
talented elementary school class, which a lot of people in the comments on my article were having fun pointing at that he had to point that out, that he was in that.
In case you forgot that he's really smart. He was smart when he was 9 years old.
Yeah. But yeah, so I don't know, like switching gears to like the practices, like he looks good. Again, it's pretty low stress right now, you know, no pads. It's very beginning of camp. They're in the ramp up period still, but he's looked really good, especially with Garrett Wilson and Tyler Conklin. I mean, Al Lazard, who we can get into, you know, he's had a really, really good start to camp, which was unexpected. But Rodgers looks like Aaron Rodgers. And so if he looks, as I've always said, he's always going to dazzle in practice setting because he's got elite accuracy and arm strength and all that stuff. So he's always going to look great here. But he looked like he did last year. I think physically he looks fine. We'll see once he starts getting hit. But I've been impressed with the offense through 2 practices for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, 9 of 11 and 11 on 11 today, 4 for 4 and 7 on 7. So he was on the mark. All right, you mentioned Alan Lazard. So the one other segment here I wanted to get into was kind of just like overall some of the key competitions and things you're looking forward to over the course of this whole training camp. And obviously Lazard is one where like you go in with expectations super low, and it's like, is Alan Lazard battling Jason Brownlee for something here? But so far with Aaron Rodgers, he's looked good, you say?
Yeah, he has. You know, he back-to-back days, he had the touchdown catch to end practice. He had I think he had the first catch yesterday. Yeah, the first catch of training camp yesterday. I think it was a diving catch. Like he's been making plays. Like, you know, I think maybe there's something to, and Salah's alluded to this, you know, he wouldn't be the first free agent to ever, you know, struggle in his first year. He struggled to an extreme degree where he was the least productive receiver in the NFL in terms of starters. Yeah. So now that there isn't expectations on him, there isn't as many eyes on him, and maybe that'll help him. Having Rodgers there will help. You know, I still wonder what his role is once Mike Williams is back and healthy, because Lazard doesn't really play on special teams, and I don't think he's as good of a blocker as advertised necessarily, or at least he wasn't last year. So, you know, I think Garrett Wilson needs to be on the field. When Mike Williams is healthy, he needs to be on the field. You need Tyler Conklin on the field. You need Breece Hall on the field. And then, you know, whether it's Malachi Corley, Xavier Gibson, you know, whatever it is, like, I don't know, like how many receivers are you going to carry on game day? Because Irv Charles has a special teams role, and I think Brownlee can play on special teams. So I don't know what Lazard's role is, but if he keeps playing like this, they're going to have a hard time to keep him off the field. And I didn't think I'd be saying that in, you know, the second day of training camp. So it's progress.
Well, you mentioned Mike Williams, who is not practicing, obviously, opening up on the PUP list. Is the anticipation still that he's on this Breece Hall plan where he will be ready to go at the beginning of the season?
You know, I think one of my favorite things about Aaron Rodgers' press conferences is that more often than not, he kind of like offers us up injury updates about his teammates, and they seem to be accurate usually. Whereas
well, that's good, because the other guy that gives updates is never accurate.
Whereas, you know, most head coaches are doing coach speak or lying or whatever. So, so Rodgers like, so Mike Williams is ahead of schedule in rehab. So, you know, you heard it from Rodgers that Mike Williams is ahead of schedule. I don't know what that entails. I imagine he'll be activated before the end of training camp, and the goal has always been for him to play in week 1. It seems like they're on track for that. I don't think he'll be a full go in week 1. I think it'll be a few weeks before he's like full go. But yeah, it's probably the Breece Hall plan. I think I had the date. Actually, I think I have it right here. Breece wasn't activated until August 15th last year, and that was even deeper in training camp because they started earlier. So
right.
So I would guess, you know, mid-August maybe would be a good target for Mike Williams to be back on the field, whether it's, you know, just doing very limited stuff or whatever it is. He's a big question mark because talent-wise, it's unquestioned. I think he's a really fun receiver. He's a perfect fit on the opposite of Garrett Wilson. I mean, a great fit for a guy like Aaron Rodgers because he can get all those 50-50 balls. And, you know, if Aaron Rodgers is going to be willing to just throw it up to a guy he believes is going to go and get it. So I think he could be a real boom for this offense, but he's coming off a torn ACL, and, you know, every single guy that suffers it responds to it differently. So we have no idea how Mike Williams is going to look. The Jets don't know. Like, there's no way of knowing because we haven't seen him out there. So he's a very big question. And you hope that he returns to form, because then this offense can be scary. But if he doesn't, then the depth at receiver doesn't look very good. So he's an interesting X factor, I think, that people are, maybe not talking about enough.
And that's probably the biggest thing with Lazard, though, is like that depth, right? If he does continue to play the way he has, there's at least that, right? You can be like, okay, if Williams isn't what he was, like Lazard has stepped up and the depth is at least a little filled out there. All right. Some other interesting spots. Chuck Clark, Ashton Davis in the secondary. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Jets tried playing it up like it was maybe a battle. I feel pretty confident that Chuck Clark will probably be the starter next to Tony Adams. Chuck actually talked to us today. He's completely healthy. He didn't even make it to the training camp last year in his first year. So, I think he should be if he's healthy, he should be an upgrade over Jordan Whitehead. And then if he's an upgrade over Jordan Whitehead, then you have, pretty solid tandem in Tony Adams, who I think is kind of flying under the radar, but I think he's going to take a leap this year. Personally, I like him a lot. And you have those corners on the outside, and if you have these two safeties that are pretty versatile, I think Jeff Ulbrich could do a lot of fun things with them. So feel pretty good about that. Safety became, we found out yesterday that Jarek Bernard-Converse, who was safety last year, they moved him to corner, I guess. So I thought he was going to be battling Jalen Key for like a fifth safety spot, but now Jalen's the only safety there. So if they're keeping 5 safeties, Jalen Key, Mr. Relevant, will make it. JBC, he's really, really athletic. He made a play yesterday, a good pass breakup on a pass from Tyrod Taylor. He missed almost all of last year with injuries, so we didn't really get to see him at all. So he's kind of a low-key intriguing guy, and someone who the preseason games are going to be big if he's going to sneak onto the roster as like a 5th corner or whatever.
I'm taking some of these from your recent story where you kind of broke down the competition. So check that out on The Athletic. There's a lot more than we're going to get to here on the pod. Izzy Abanaconda versus Tariq Cohen. Obviously, Cohen's a guy they signed. And at the time, a lot of people talked about new kickoff rules and how he fits into that. And then you have Izzy, who I think everybody was high on a year ago at this time, but then we didn't really get to see him.
Yeah. They have 3 running backs that are locks to make it. You have Breece Hall, you have Braylon Allen, and Isaiah Davis, the 2 rookies, who I think have looked pretty good in terms of like their strong running. You'd think they'd probably keep a 4th running back, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Nick Bodden's on the PUP list to start camp. I was intrigued by him because of the special teams rules, like as a blocker on returns, like it becomes more valuable because there's going to be way more returns. So I keep an eye on him. But yeah, Tariq Cohen, today he had a great play. Like he looked like vintage Tariq Cohen, where he got the ball from Tyrod on a carry to the right side. There was like a, pile of defenders there. He saw it. He cut back the other way, ran back, behind the line of scrimmage and got a big gain down the left sideline. And Izzy had it was with like the 3rd-team offense, but he had a pretty big run as well where he showed some bursts. So if they're going to keep a 4th running back, it's probably between those 2 guys, I would say. And Cohen, he's really only 27 or 28, and he's the oldest. They have like a really young running back room. Like Braylon Allen's 20. Breece Hall was pointing out that Isaiah Davis is, I think, older than him, the rookie. So like it's a very young running back room, and Tariq's a veteran who has some return skills. And if he has that burst, like I'd be interested in keeping him around. So, but that's going to be a competition, especially again, like running backs like that fighting for jobs in the preseason is always fun because they get a lot of the touches. So Izzy's fighting for his job. Last year I was pretty high on him. I don't think the coaches were as high on him as the season progressed. So it's I'd say Tariq's ahead of him in the pecking order if I had to guess, like right this second.
All right, just overall, it's 2 days, it's early, but has anyone surprised you, or who has kind of shined from not the star players, but
yeah. Well, so I mentioned Lazard already. Obviously, Takers McKinley is another one who I think has looked really good. Trying to think. Let's see. Jeremy Ruckert, I'll say him. I think he's looked really, really good. Rodgers has hit him on some really nice passes. The athleticism seems to be there for Ruckert, who I think dealt with some injuries his first couple of years, especially his first year. And yeah, he just like stood out to me more than I think he did the last 2 years, where I think he's catching everything thrown to him. He's moving pretty well. I think he's a better blocker than a lot of tight ends. So I was curious why they didn't bring in any tight ends the offseason, but if Rucker can live up to his potential, I think they have a pretty good pairing with him and Conklin, who also, like, I feel like is taken for granted, but I think he's looked really, really good. He catches everything thrown to him. So Rucker would be one that stands out. It's still too early to like really dig into the under radar guy. Quantez Stiggers is another one. He had an interception yesterday, and he had a pass breakup today that would have been in a pick, but he was out of bounds when he caught it. So he looks like the real deal to me. I mean, we'll see once they get pads on and things get legit and in preseason games when teams are scheming up and all that stuff. But Quantez is somebody I'm really, really intrigued by.
All right. We're going to be coming, potential changes coming for the show overall that we'll just kind of throw a little tease out there to everybody. Yeah. But in the meantime, I think we'll try to get together once a week here through training camp. And as we figure that stuff out, anything else, Zach, from the early going?
I was gonna say there were some good questions in the chat. I'll just run through a few of them real quick. First, Boy Green asked if I'm seeing Deadpool Wolverine. I'm actually going with my least favorite person, Connor Hughes, tomorrow after practice. So
the good thing is, like, you don't have to talk to him in a movie.
Exactly. Well, I mean, I don't know if he's going to be talking. He's the type to talk during a movie. I could totally see him doing that. We'll find out. We might even have an outfit that I'm sure.
So this is you and Connor's first movie date.
No, we went to another we went to Ant-Man, I believe, together too. Okay. And we thought it would be funny if as soon as we walked out, we tweeted our reaction like at the same exact time, and then everybody to see if everybody could catch on that we went together. But anyway, I'm very excited for that movie. Dan Botter asked about Tyron Smith seeming like the type of guy after a practice rep will take a young D lineman aside and show him how he blocked him. Have you seen any of that? I haven't seen that specifically, though. I think Jermaine Johnson was talking about asking him questions. But what I did see is after practice today, him and Morgan Moses, like 15 minutes after practice, were like giving tips to some of the young offensive linemen. I think having those two guys has been invaluable. Let's see what else we got here. There's a couple others that I liked. Someone asked to share the Mike sticker story. It's just it's a character from my favorite show. I think you should leave with Tim Robinson. We're trying to find the guy who did this meme that's become so popular. He's a hot dog. And I wanted to put it on my mic so everybody could see it.
There you go.
Let's see what else we got here. A lot of stuff about Connor. I don't want to talk about him anymore. Do you think the fans will feel better about Saleh this season? It's a judgment season for him. Yeah. Will they feel better about him? I mean, it depends on if they're winning or how he does with when the games are close, how he's like, obviously there's a lot of pressure on Saleh. I keep seeing his name come up nationally. Like, he gets a lot of flack. He hasn't even done anything yet to be criticized, and he's getting criticized by like national media. I got an email for like odds for coaches most likely to be fired first, and he was in first. So like the pressure is on him. And I think this is a top 5 NFL roster. So if they don't come out of the gates playing well, then the noise is going to get really, really loud for him. But anyway, we can wrap it up on that note. It's good. So we're gone for a couple weeks because we were both traveling and all that crap, but we're happy to be back. We have some big news down the pike, hopefully, that we're going to be able to share with you guys soon.
Until the next time, thanks for tuning into the Can't Wait podcast, everybody. We will talk to you again soon.